Have you ever made a quick decision confidently, founded on supposedly supporting research, only for it to backfire? Or have you ever found yourself only reading news stories that further support your opinion? These are just a few instances of cognitive bias that we experience in every day of our lives, be it at work or at home. Today we'll be diving into the fascinating world of cognitive biases in decision making. We'll explore what cognitive biases are, why we have them in the first place, and the downside of cognitive biases. We'll also look at a few types of cognitive biases such as anchoring bias, confirmation bias, and a lot more. Finally, we'll discuss ways to reduce cognitive biases from our decision-making process. So let's understand the quirks of our minds. Hi everyone, my name is Aiena. I'm a flight attendant and a cabin crew trainer. Apart from travel, other topics that excite me are leadership, health, and wellness. Welcome to this channel. Our brains are highly sophisticated organs, but they do sometimes go off track. Understanding cognitive biases is the key to making smarter decisions and choices. So what is a cognitive bias? Cognitive bias, also called a psychological bias, is the tendency to act in an irrational way due to our limited ability to process information objectively. Now, it is not always negative, but it can cloud our judgment and affect how clearly we perceive situations, people, or potential risks. Cognitive bias is an umbrella term used to describe our systematic but flawed patterns of response to judgment and decision-related problems. Now, these patterns are predictably non-random. While based on our beliefs and experiences, they often go against logic and probability. Although we like to think of ourselves as rational beings who process all information before making a decision, this is often not the case. Everyone, regardless of their intelligence, expertise, political preference, age, or gender, is prone to cognitive bias to different degrees. Now, this is especially true when we're fatigued, stressed, or multitasking. Even people like scientists, researchers, CEOs, and CFOs of the world are also impacted by their own cognitive biases. Interestingly, it's a fundamental concept in behavioral economics. As I was saying earlier, cognitive biases are not a bad thing. They are hardwired into our brains and can help us navigate the information overload inherent to everyday hectic lives of ours. Now, if we had to think carefully before all our actions, it would be really hard to function, right? Now, to be more efficient, what our brains do is they rely on our experiences and beliefs actually more than we realize. These become mental shortcuts, also called heuristics, and are conscious decisions that we make. These rules of thumb help us make decisions and predictions. But when they are intuitive or subconscious, ones that people often don't realize become cognitive biases, and in such situations they're acting based on biases or preconceived notions that are not based on logic. Psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman developed the concept of cognitive bias from their 1970s research into why people struggle to reason and judge objectively in certain situations. Along with Paul Slovic, they published their early findings in their book Judgment Under Uncertainty. Daniel Kahneman got a Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 for these theories in behavioral economics. Now, a great but intense read is his book Thinking Fast and Slow. If you want to understand the irrationalities of your mind, I highly recommend this book. Let's now understand why we have cognitive biases. Our brains are incredibly powerful, but they're also limited in processing capacity. Our tendency towards cognitive bias can come from many different sources. Here are a few of them. Because our minds have a limited ability to store and recall information, we simply can't humanly consider all relevant information when we make a conclusion or decision. Now, if our decision involves our loved ones as opposed to total strangers, we'll evaluate the situation differently. So emotions and EQ play a critical role in decision making. Our judgments and motivation are influenced by our existing attitudes and beliefs. We are very likely to choose the beliefs and strategies that are most likely to help us arrive at the conclusions that we want to arrive at. Social influence is a big one. People have a tendency to conform to opinions expressed earlier by others, or they act in socially desirable ways. This can influence collective behaviors such as voting. There's some research that shows us that cognitive bias may also increase as people age. Now, this might be due to decreased cognitive flexibility with age. So, what's the downside of cognitive biases? Now, although relying on mental shortcuts in our everyday life is effective and leads to faster decision making when timing is more important than accuracy, cognitive bias, on the other hand, can lead us to misunderstand events, facts, and even other people. Cognitive biases can negatively impact our decision-making ability, limiting how receptive we are to new or contradictory information. It also influences how accurately we can recall incidents. For example, an event where we were an eyewitness. Inaccurate or incomplete recollection of events can lead to recall bias. Next downside is a big one. When we are bogged down by cognitive biases, our anxiety levels might go up, making us focus only on the negative events or aspects of our lives. Our relationships with others suffer too when we are too quick to judge their personality on the basis of a single trait. For us as individuals, our critical thinking goes down, leading us to perpetuate misconceptions or misinformation that can not only be harmful for others but us as well. Now let's dive into some specific type of cognitive biases. Anchoring bias is the tendency to rely on the first piece of information offered. It's also known as first impression bias. It applies particularly to numbers. Negotiators use anchoring bias by starting with a number that is either too low or too high. They know that this number will set the bar for subsequent offers. Anchoring bias is used heavily in individualistic cultures. For example, if a car dealership shows you a high-priced car first, any subsequent cars you see may seem a better deal even if they are still overpriced. Next, we have confirmation bias. This bias leads people to search for, interpret, and remember information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs. Confirmation bias can lead to poor decision making in various contexts, including interpersonal relationships, medical diagnosis, and even application of the law. Confirmation bias is also incredibly pervasive on the internet, particularly with social media. Various social media platforms help reinforce our confirmation bias by feeding us stories that we are likely to agree with, further pushing us down the echo chambers of political polarization. Another example for you: if you believe that a particular diet is effective, you're more likely to pay attention to the success stories and ignore evidence that contradicts this belief. The halo effect is a type of cognitive bias where our overall impression of a person influences how we feel and think about their character. You let a positive first impression influence your perception of someone in unrelated areas. For example, if we perceive someone as attractive, we're more likely to also see them as intelligent and kind, regardless of whether these attributes are true about them or not. Now, this can be propagated by our consumerist world, so watch out for this one. You may also come across the opposite, the horn effect. As you may have guessed, this is when someone's negative traits cloud your judgment of them or their abilities. Bandwagon bias is a form of groupthink. Essentially, it's easier to go along with the most popular opinion in a group, even if we don't completely agree with it. It's also often the reason for things like fads and panic buying. Bandwagon bias is one of the most difficult forms of cognitive bias to overcome. This is because you might feel like you're going against the group if you disagree with something, but it's important that you do still consider and offer different perspectives, because if you don't and you choose to dismiss alternative points of view, you could be overlooking something important. The framing effect is a cognitive bias that happens when our choices are influenced by the way the information is framed, say through different wordings, settings, or even situations. Individuals have a tendency to make risk avoidant choices when options are presented positively to you, while selecting more loss avoidant options when presented with a negative frame. As an example, imagine while doing your groceries, you come across two different chicken products. Both cost and weight exactly the same. Now, one is labeled 80% lean and the other 20% fat. Now, comparing the two, you feel that 20% fat sounds like an unhealthy option, so you choose the 80% lean option. Now, in reality, there's actually no difference between the two products, but one sounds more appealing than the other due to the framing effect. Now, I've just shared 5 of my favorite cognitive biases with you, but there are lots of other types out there. It's a fascinating world that we live in, and it's useful to understand how our brain can cook things up. Realizing how these biases affect us can be eye-opening. Now, which biases impact your world? I'd love to hear about them. Now, overcoming cognitive biases does require quite a bit of self-reflection before you can act on them. Let's talk about what you can do to overcome them and make better decisions. Here are a few strategies. Simply being aware of cognitive biases can help us recognize when they occur and take steps to mitigate their impact. Practice critical thinking by questioning your assumptions and considering alternative viewpoints. The more you'll do it, the better you'll get at it. Consult with others who have different backgrounds and experiences to gain a more broader understanding of the situation, as you might be blinded by your cognitive biases. Structured approaches like decision trees or pros and cons lists can be helpful in reducing the influence of biases too. Lastly, avoid making hasty decisions. We don't live in jungles and we do not need to depend blindly on our limbic brains. Give yourself time to gather information, reflect on your choices, and then make decisions. By understanding cognitive biases, we can become more mindful decision makers both in our personal and professional lives. Remember, your brain is a powerful tool, but it can also take shortcuts. By being aware of these biases, you can make smarter choices and avoid letting your brain lead you off track. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content on how to understand your brain and make the most of this amazing mind. On that note, till we meet again, aiena signing off, and may you untangle from the shackles of cognitive biases, think critically, and make logical decisions.